6:30. I'll call this meeting to order. Karen, could I have you note attendance for this evening? And Paul did send me a note that he is gone tonight. And if I could ask all those who are able to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have anybody signed up for open forum this evening? No. Okay. Dan, first item on our agenda, discussion of our tobacco ordinance update. I believe you're going to walk us through that.
Yep. Just let me get my presentation here on the screen. Mayor, members of the council, what's before you tonight is some of the suggested updates to the tobacco ordinance. Just kind of want to give a quick overview of how we got to where we are today. 6 months, there's a 6-month moratorium that's currently in place for the city, so we cannot issue a tobacco license right now. That was placed in March. That is scheduled to expire on the 11th of September. Part of that moratorium involved going back through and doing some licensing, our current licensing practice protocol, our review, and then looking at how other communities are managing or regulating tobacco use within their communities as well. Came back in April, did a scoping, kind of a first cut, what does council kind of want, kind of scoped out where to focus the efforts on. So kind of took that information back and started doing the work required to make the updates. Here's a timeline that was presented back in April. You can see now we're kind of in the orange section. We're kind of moved away from the scoping, and now we're kind of in the actual execution phase of it. With that September 11th expiration date, just want everybody to know that we still have plenty of time, even with our statutory requirements for a 30-day licensing update notification and the 10-day notification for ordinance. We still have plenty of time between now and what needs to be considered. So we're way good on time before the September 11th expiration of the moratorium. Just kind of give a high-level view of some of the methodology I use in kind of going through and developing these updates. Where I first started was I went out and reached out to the League of Minnesota Cities. They have model ordinances for a lot of what municipalities do. So I went out and kind of grabbed their model ordinance. They also have a memo on tobacco regulations within the city, kind of what you can regulate, what you can't regulate. It's basically they take the ordinance and put it in a little bit more plain English. Kind of started with those two. And then I went out and also I worked with Bridget and had her kind of compile the cities that have recently adopted updates to their ordinances. And the reason why I went here was kind of as the vaping technology is evolving, this is kind of an evolutionary process. They're kind of like on the leading edge of regulation. So I wanted to see how are other cities kind of managing this process. So that's why I went out for the ones that were more recently adopted. Kind of took all of the model language, the different cities' languages, kind of compiled it all, and then looked at our current chapter, which is chapter 118, and then kind of came up with these suggestions to kind of look at, what other cities have done, what the league has done, and kind of looked at our current policy, current chapter. What do you have here before? What I basically did is I went through each section, so I just broke it off section by section. It's kind of an easier way to follow versus trying to jump all over the ordinance. Like I said, chapter 118 is where all of our tobacco regulations are found. I guess what I'd like to do is just kind of go through, I'll give a quick overview of some of the suggested changes in there or what I kind of saw, and then allow for comments at the end, so we're not kind of taking this onesie-twosie, if that's okay with council. One of the first things that I saw was an update to the purpose, which is section 118.01. This is kind of the language that kind of defines why is a city regulating tobacco within its regulations. After comparing our purpose to some other cities' purposes, our language is not quite as strong as some other ones. Some other ones kind of call out the public health a little bit more to the forefront. Preventing youth access has a little bit more of a call out in that section. So that language is one that could be updated to kind of strengthen the reasoning for our ordinance. On the definition side, two things that I saw was the definition, putting a definition in there for electronic delivery device. Our current code is silent on that. So while we regulate like rolling papers and other things that are used for using tobacco, we do not have any regulation on electronic delivery devices. Second thing in there was adding a requirement for child-resistant packaging for vape products. So if it's a liquid, it has to be in a child-resistant package. It just can't be in a easy-to-open container. When I put them in the definition section, that also it would imply that we would then regulate those too. So there would be, in part of, under the definition for electronic delivery device, we'd update our ordinance then to regulate that or to control that use as well, kind of in the same section as we regulate the rolling papers, et cetera. On the licensing side, there was quite a bit of conversation at the last, when we scoped this out on the license and say, well, can we do to maybe strengthen up some of our licensing requirements? One of the requirements that I came up with was adding a requirement to provide a management structure of the company. So we're now, existing licenses come in, it's just the applicant. So we don't have any requirements to say who's actually going to be managing the company. This would allow, if a company comes in and the management structure doesn't change, but the owner does, it kind of helps to identify if there's already those arm length kind of transitions happening between license holders. So you could see, so-and-so is still managing on both applications, and you could just verify there's a problem with one, it could potentially shift over to the other license application. Just adds a little bit more transparency as to how, the company's gonna function. Also on the licensing, for new licensing, is adding in language that the applicant needs to demonstrate a training programs established for both new and existing employees to prevent the sale of products to minors. Basically, the employees should have to go through some sort of underage compliance training so they know what to look for when they're selling the product. Adding in a requirement that the license holder is 21 years of age or older. I did see another city that already currently has this in place. Again, it's just one of those things where if an 18-year-old comes in, probably a little bit more easier to sell to friends who potentially are underage. So adding that license requirement in there. Another city does already have that in place, so that's where I kind of borrowed that language from. And then the last one in here is just changing the expiration date from December 31st to January 31st. That's nothing more than an administrative change. That just means that they would expire at the same time as the alcohol licenses. So the renewal period would be in the same calendar year. So it just kind of cleans that language up a little bit. On section 118.06, the prohibited sales portion, is strengthening the language on the requirement that we check out government issued photo ID. Right now, our current code is pretty silent on that. This would prevent youth from coming in, say, on a student ID. They would actually have to have a government-issued ID. There would be a ID card from the state of Minnesota, a driver's license, passport, something that's government-issued that proves that they're of age to purchase. Again, other cities have kind of put that requirement in there, so I kind of strengthen that language up. Just kind of remove some of that ambiguity in terms of what qualifies as an ID. On the compliance check, right now, current city code requires only one compliance check be done per year. Well, I also had a conversation with Rick about this. We are doing more than one. We're doing 2 or 3 annually. Changing the code language lets a new applicant come in, know that they are going to be inspected multiple times throughout the year. So it just kind of codifies existing practice and puts it in place. So 2 compliance checks a year be recommended. The minimum penalties, what's included in the memo is basically the existing minimum penalties. These were updated. This was kind of the focus point of the last ordinance update that we did, I believe, in 2016. When I kind of looked at the other ordinances, where they're all kind of over the board in terms of what the penalties are. So we're not out of the ballpark with it, and we're not, we're kind of in the middle, so we're in alignment on some respects. Some are a little bit more strict, some are a little bit more loose. So I just put those in there just to kind of call that section out to see if there are any changes that want to be done to the minimum penalties portion of it. And a new section of it would be the location restriction. This was discussed during the scoping section. Part of that scoping section kind of looked at, creating a new license requirement for tobacco only or vape shop, and then looking at, can we restrict that usage of just say a vape shop so it's not anywhere within the city, because currently code is silent. So long as they're in a commercial district, they can be currently placed. First, we went out to the state, actually thanks to Bridget, she actually found this definition. So there's an existing definition for what a tobacco product shop is, and that's one that sells 90% of their gross receipts come from tobacco-based products. So the first thing would be to recommend setting up a tobacco product shop. So those would be your vape-only shops that are collecting 90% or more of their revenues from vape products. This location restriction would not affect, say, a convenience store, a gas station, a grocery store, somebody that sells them as part of another kind of group of sales. But once that tobacco product shop license is established, then you would limit the use of that so that you would not be able to locate a tobacco-only shop within 500 feet of a city park or a school. Again, it's kind of preventing them from being located school adjacent. There's a couple locations in town where the buildings are right across from a school, and just kind of making sure that we're not putting those types of businesses in direct, easy access basically to underage participants. Existing license holders would be grandfathered in since they already are in their location, so they would be, as long as they stay in their location, they would be grandfathered in. But right now, the footage is 500 feet. That language is actually currently in our adult use ordinance, so it's borrowed from that portion of our city code. So a lot of that wording is already in our existing language. I just kind of transferred it over to tobacco products. That's pretty much kind of the highlights of the ordinance updates. Kind of looking for feedback on that, and then kind of before we go on to the next one, I do kind of have just included in the memo was just kind of an anticipated timeline for kind of what the next steps are, just so everybody kind of knows where we are today and what the next steps are to get this approved. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions, look for feedback on what's presented here, and
Well, I just want to first of all say good work, Dan. This is, I think, really a solid start, and I'm happy that we're on a pathway to a much stronger ordinance in the community. The next iteration of this, I would love to see kind of the proposed changes integrated right into it would really be helpful kind of as the read-through, so just a little piece of advice there. I'm wondering how we want to do this, Mayor Bain. Do we want to just take it section by section?
Yeah, maybe let's take, maybe that's how my notes are organized, section by section. Do we just want to walk through?
Yeah,
That works.
yeah.
Let's do it.
That'd be great.
Maybe starting up at the top, and actually maybe using the guide that Dan has in front of us on the screen. And I'm also going back then to his, so maybe just starting, any feedback, comments on purpose? And Dan mentions stronger, to Councilmember Bystrom's point, the devil's in the details. I think, Dan, if I understand your process, you're looking for overall guidance so that as specific language gets crafted with Bridget, you're kind of crafting specific language based on this first round of feedback?
correct. And yeah, Mayor, members of council, what we're looking at doing today is that if there's a movement on we want the purpose updated, then we'd go back, draft language, redline it, compare to the existing ordinance, bring it back. I just wanted to make sure we didn't kind of have Bridget craft language that was going to get struck out because there was no interest in, or there's kind of no, agreement that should be included. So this is more, all of these language changes would then go to Bridget, and she would make them, put them in, legalese, for lack of a better term, and they'd be redlined, so you'd see the differences between the existing and the proposed.
Well, I like the idea of strengthening that purpose, the why behind why we're doing this, and some information about, I think you had mentioned some public health information about the why, I think is important.
Access for youth. Yeah, for sure.
I'd like to talk about the very first sentence there, on the purpose. It talks about the 18-year-olds and all that kind of stuff. There's been so much talk about raising that up to 21 years to be legal to buy tobacco, and I know that's been hashed around in the state of Minnesota quite a bit, and I don't see any reason why we shouldn't change it to 21. Do you think that'd be a big deal, or
Why we should change it, or
why we should change it to 21?
Well, I don't know that we're necessarily proposing that this evening. I mean, that's my perspective.
Do you want to talk about changing? I'm not sure I understand. You want to talk about changing
Yeah, I
it to
do.
21?
Yeah, because I think if it happens with the state of Minnesota, then all of a sudden our ordinance is going to be behind the times a little bit too, And I don't know how close that is to being reality, but.
Well, I would say it almost passed this year. It ended up getting wrapped into an omnibus bill, and that full bill was thrown out. But it had bipartisan support and the support of the governor.
But in the
So-
but in the meantime, the cities can adopt the ordinances too.
They can, or counties.
And it sounds like there's more, there's an article out this weekend on Hennepin County. So I don't know if Washington County has talked about it at all, but seems like more and more, since it didn't pass at the state level, are moving. For those reasons, Sam, I think.
I think it's gonna happen, I really do. And
So Dan, so if it happens, would we be required to are all cities then required to, or is it our ordinances changed kind of because it's,
we would almost have to change.
kind of, they're overruled or superseded
Yeah,
by-
I believe, and I'd have to confirm with Bridget, but I believe our ordinance would automatically, the legal age would automatically jump to 21.
Did we
So,
actually call out 18 today? Do we call out the age of 18?
I believe so. I believe it says under age of 18 in current language.
Okay, that's how we define underage purchases.
Yeah, it's a 118.06.
Right.
I mean, you know how I feel about Tobacco 21. You know, there's a lot of research behind why that's a good idea in a community, and I think you're right, Councilmember Husnick, it's coming. You know, I'd be comfortable for the purpose of today, kind of getting through this language and strengthening it as is. Actually, I'd be fine going either way, frankly.
Should we get through, maybe let's get through this, kind of what is on screen, and then maybe table to the bottom, and we can kind of circle back on consideration of Tobacco 21? Is that, okay?
Sounds like a great idea.
Okay. Dan, help me understand the I want to make sure I'm clear on the structure of who the applicant is and the different scenarios that would require a new application to be submitted. The applicant is it the individual or is it the business?
It can be either.
It can be
So
either.
you have like an LLC, that's a legal entity, which can then apply for, so let's just say I set up, Undum LLC, I can then apply for the license holder.
Right.
If I get 3 violations under my LLC and I have somebody else that comes in under, some wife comes in as the applicant, they, so technically each one of these segments out as the existing, and then the management structure was kind of the link between the two, where you can kind of take a look at,
Right.
If you're just kind of changing a name only at the top, but everything else is staying within place. So if the problem lies with, say, the people on the ground, you get a better idea, by putting some requirements in there for new license holder to say, what's your management structure look like? What's your management team look like? So you're not just potentially hiding through the LLC process. It kind of, again, sheds out a little bit more transparency in there.
Right, okay. If it is a corporate entity and you have new owners of a corporate entity, does the license transfer with that corporate entity?
So currently with alcohol licenses, let's say either there's a board change and the 3 board members switch over and there's a whole new board in the corporate structure, they technically apply for a brand new liquor license
So-
because it's different entities and you can't transfer those amongst differences. Trying to, between kind of going that kind of extreme route to try to get something a little bit more, that's kind of where this management structure kind of came in place.
So do we have strong enough, going after that alcohol model, do we have strong enough change of control language today, or do we need to consider some strengthening of change of control, recognizing that cat and mouse, we can set the requirement to be whatever, but somebody's going to be able to perhaps, I'm trying to prevent somebody from kind of constructing a business deal that allows for a transfer that we wouldn't have intended. So I'd like us to move to be closer to I know the alcohol laws are very strict on that.
Right now, the way it exists is that it's pretty open. I mean, when you look at tobacco license applications, I go in, and we don't necessarily, if it's a valid LLC or a valid INC or a valid business, that's our criteria. So once that's the point, we're done. We're like, okay, now we look at that, does that entity have any, or that applicant have anything that precludes them from being licensed? And if they do, the owner of the company could theoretically then find somebody who doesn't, have them apply for the license. The difference is the applicant then takes a liability with them, but for some people, that's not a deterrent. So right now, it's fairly easy to,
Right.
on the alcohol side, it's more difficult, because you do at least see both memberships of if it's a partnership or whatever management structure is there.
Do we have an opportunity to adopt more of the alcohol rules of change of control that would require a new application to be submitted?
Yeah, I mean, I would want to track that direction where it's not just, somebody gets
Right.
the application, they can flip it to their friend then they have,
Right.
they have to get a new application.
Right.
Or they'd have to stay involved with the company. So, I mean, they'd have to still maintain that license in their name.
Yes. I don't know, any thoughts on that feedback on that change of control and who's the license holder?
I think just clarifying it like we talked about.
Okay. Next section around the definitions.
My only question here is, do we need to call out like the e-cig juices? I don't see that in here specifically. I mean, we talk about tobacco generally and nicotine generally, and a lot of the juices contain nicotine. Well, most of them do. I mean, is there any need to do that? Is there any need to wrap that into an existing piece here?
So, I mean, this is kind of outside, like, the flavor conversation. This is more just on, are we going to call out, like, a vape? Like you said,
Right.
the terminology, I always
Right.
choose, escapes me a little bit. But yeah, I believe the last time we did this, that was included since they contain nicotine. I think that's where they kind of came under that umbrella.
Okay.
But I can ask Bridget to put clarifying language in there if need be.
Yeah, we don't want to get caught because it would be an error of omission.
Right.
It just says any product containing nicotine. I mean, I know it does say nicotine does not include any product that has been approved or certified by the United States Food and Drug Administration for sale and all that as a tobacco cessation product. But it seems like we're kind of covered there, but
And it feels that way to me too. I just kind of wanted to bring it up. I mean, we talked about, it says dissolved, inhaled, snorted, sniffed, ingested, but I don't know that that necessarily defines the vaping side of it. So just, maybe even adding the word vaped in there or something would make a difference. I don't know. I just wanted some clarification on that to see.
I'll follow up with Bridget to make sure it's
Yeah,
clarification.
again, just an error of omission and we get caught on something somewhere along the way. Otherwise, it looked good to me, this section.
Correct. Any other feedback on the definition section?
yeah, when you get to the tobacco-related devices, I don't know. I'm not arguing with it, Kathy. It's just that I'm pretty comfortable with the way it's written there. So,
And adding the
Well,
electronic
adding-
delivery
yeah.
device to a piece.
Yeah, that
and we're-
electronic delivery device goes into a fair amount of detail.
Yeah.
I think that question, though, Kathy, to your previous point, comes back when we actually see a redlined version of the actual text and opportunity to do a word check then. Any other feedback on the definition section? One question, Dan, so child-resistant packaging, that was common, was that in the league model?
No, that was actually, and I think it might have been Bloomington's potentially, one of the ones I looked at that was recently passed. And I think it's because of the fact that products are now sold in liquid containers. So there was a requirement that those container vials are child-resistant packaging. So, a child just can't open them up and ingest the product.
Is that a common delivery mechanism? I'm all for it. I just want to I don't know what those products look like. And so is it an undue hardship for how our, Quick Trip is selling it today or Holiday is selling it today?
I believe it's already coming in that format. I don't know for sure. I mean, I've seen the product. I don't, I haven't looked at it from the child. I just saw that in a couple of the ordinances, and I said it's a good idea. I mean, my estimation was, if it was already in existing other ordinances, to kind of bring that in, so that way you can't just kind of bring in the unresistant,
Right.
child-proof packaging.
I think it's a great addition. I just want to make sure it's reasonable, it's feasible for retailers to comply.
I believe so, and to that, kind of on the retail side of it too, I mean, there's gonna be the opportunity there's a 30-day notice period that we're gonna do an ordinance change, so the retailers have a chance to comment, so they're gonna be able to let you know what the product, with more detail than I would be able to
Okay.
speak to that portion of it.
Good point.
Okay. The license section, 11803.
Guess my only comment on here is why are we only requiring this of new license holders? I would suspect we could give current retailers time to come into compliance in this section potentially, or require it with their next license application, you know, to demonstrate, you know, that they have the, kind of the training programs, training and monitoring programs in place. That was my only comment here.
Expanding on that thought, so something like effective immediately for new license holders, effective in the 2021 license year, so giving a year and a year and a quarter of ability for existing license holders. Just walking through that section, just making sure this is feasible for existing license holders. Management, so management structure details. Training program required. License holders 21, yeah. I'm gonna scroll down just to see if there's anything else in that license section that would be. Would your intent, just thinking out loud here, would you intend for existing license holders to be re-backgrounded? It's because it's kind of the section where we pick that up.
We've been caught in that regard as well, isn't that correct? In the past or not? I mean, is it a good idea to require that periodically? You know, maybe every few years or?
Administratively, what is that? Is that, how many tobacco licenses do we have in the city?
I believe it's, is it 20? I can't recall off the top of my head. It's more than I thought. I mean, there's a number that are out there. It's, so on the renewal side, like on the process side, the renewal side, if the applicant has 0 underage sales, it's an administratively approved license. If it's a new application, that comes before council. So the renewal is relatively just kind of a, you know, you have an underage sales, if the applicant's still the same, we don't go through a re-backgrounding, we don't kind of, with that, you know, once you pass the background, we don't require an additional background check. We do on some other licenses, we had conversation, I think it was massage therapists, of doing a more frequent background check just in case that there was an infraction after license issue, you'd catch that in the subsequent renewals. We can add language in there to, you know, do every 3 to 5 years, do a background check on it. We've just kind of, one of the reasons why this was applying to new license application was to the fact that if we put this in place in October or September, it could potentially be tough for an existing business to kind of retool up before the renewal is done. So that's kind of why I initially looked at it. If you give them a grace period, say 1 renewal, everybody's in compliance for 2021, they have a full year to get,
Right.
you know, and I don't think anything in there, you know, from what it, kind of going through this is a Herculean lift. I think some of these things were actually brought forward during the last renewals. I think one of the companies in town actually brought forward a kind of a plan that had some of these places that already were in there. So it's just kind of, again, codifying some of that language in there. But on the renewals, we don't do a background check on an annual basis. It's more of a, you know, you haven't violated, you get the administrative stamp of, you get a new license.
I think the other piece, and I'm not sure if it belongs in this section, that kind of jumps out at me is, you know, just based on my limited experience here of late, is a requirement that individuals at the point of sale be 18 years old. So I'd like to take a look at that. There's just absolutely no reason why a 16-year-old should be at the counter selling these products.
Oh,
Does that even, is that happen now?
What do you
Under
think about a
18
gas
selling?
station though? There's a lot of youth that work at gas stations or grocery stores.
And there's usually management there that are a little older, though.
With them requiring every tobacco purchase to be done by a manager, that could be quite punitive.
I just don't think they're not allowed to sell alcohol.
Could you, something like you have in here before about the definition of the vape shops, like 90% of your sales are, I don't know if that's getting too in the weeds, but I see what you're saying about gas stations that, but vape shops, yeah, I've 16-year-old selling.
I can definitely take a look at that. I mean, I'd have to, that's a great question, I think, for me to bring to Bridget when I talk to her just about, are you able to restrict that? And then to Councilmember Thompson's point, you can definitely put that, you can put a different regulation on a vape only or a tobacco only shop versus something that sells it as part of a larger offering of retail goods.
Right.
That one's a tricky one because it's almost like it should be a best practice on their business end.
Absolutely, it should
So that's
be.
what I was just going to mention. So it seems to me the district manager at Holiday's been, I think it's Holiday Station, has kind of provided input several times on some of these laws. Be interesting to get their perspective on what they do from a corporate perspective on how they manage it. And it might be somebody, over 18 is in the building, but they might allow the transaction to happen with a minor. Or maybe they aren't. Maybe I'm the one that's antiquated on this. Maybe they don't allow those sales. Be interesting to hear that.
I'd be
and
interested
feedback.
to know what the county recommendation is during training as well. When they're training the retailers, is there a recommendation that it not be anybody under 18 at point of sale?
True. Yep. Good point.
I'd have to give credit to the Holiday Stations and the other gas stations. They've done a very good job compared to the vaping
That's-
places.
yep.
And their input would be important to me.
I agree.
And as far as the 16 thing, it still has to go back to the management, any kind of an issue. So me personally, I wouldn't want to see it change unless it's really imperative we do so.
I think some, input on that would be helpful.
Yep.
The other, so in this license section, training program, do we want to define minimum standards of a training program? I'm concerned on balancing what's a thorough and successful training program or effective training program with somebody having a one sentence statement in an employee manual somewhere that says that's our training program. Don't sell. We require everybody that appears under the age of 30 to be carded or something, right? Like, I don't find that to be an effective training program. I also don't want to put staff, I don't want you to put staff in the position of having to gauge. I'd rather something be codified or in our code of what is a minimum standard. Did you run across that in any of your research or?
I think, I know the county does compliance trainings, I think maybe using their model saying based on county compliance training as the, if they don't want to develop their own, they could just use that, because that material is available to any retailer that sells the product, so, I would say maybe use that as the standard and then, say here, make sure you have something similar to this in place as potentially as a starting point.
There's a lot of rigor in their training program, so that would be a good model.
Would you go as far as to say the code should say, Washington County training program or equivalent, or would you go that far to set the bar?
That would make it pretty strong.
I'm interested in some industry feedback on that as well,
Oh, definitely,
right?
definitely.
I want us to be descriptive, set the bar so that you're not having to make that interpretation. Or also just for council to get the argument of, we have a training program. So,
And they provide it at no cost to retailers in the community,
right.
so.
Next section would be around prohibited sales. This is primarily around requiring government-issued IDs. signage to be placed, age verification requirements. Seems to be pretty straightforward from my perspective.
Yeah, I didn't,
Any questions on this section?
yeah, I didn't
Comments?
I didn't have anything major here.
Okay. Compliance checks and inspections, stating in code, we're gonna raise it to 2 annually. It's been a practice anyway, but actually, the police department has occasionally done 3, and they consider the 3rd one to be an education-only check. It's nice if we could continue that in practice. I think it's good to have stated 2 compliance checks.
One of the pieces that came to mind here for me in this section, 118.10, was somehow triggering a faster penalty phase. I mean, it seems like there can be some time that goes by between the noncompliance and then coming before the council. I'm not sure if there's if there's a way to accelerate that. Just thinking out loud here about some potential ways to strengthen this section. I think the other piece for me is consideration of incentivizing compliance. An X number of years with no violations, being non-compliant. For a certain number of years, perhaps receiving a reduced license fee or something like that. I think sometimes we focus on the negative, and it's good to focus on the folks that are really doing the right thing as well. So that's another piece here that just kind of came to mind for me.
I like the idea of incentivizing to.
What is the application fee? Or the renewal? I guess the renewal fee.
I'd have to go to the fee schedule to find that.
Ah.
I know it's a couple $100, I think. It's been a while since I've renewed a tobacco license, so I'm making a guess at this point.
I do like the incentive. Just think a little bit more around what that should be, or what that could look like. Dan, any incentive when you're looking at other ordinances?
I didn't see any. Most other ones focus primarily on punishment, not a lot of incentivization
Yeah.
going on. So,
Lots of sticks, not very many carrots.
yeah, no, and I know, again, that was another portion of that, when the industry kind of came in and proposed some potential updates. An incentivization program was one that did come forward on their kind of, that list of, that package of that was released a couple of years ago, so. I know that at that time, there was some industry support behind that to incentivize compliance.
Yeah, and maybe that belongs in section 118.12, we could do penalties and incentives or something, I don't know. So, we're really kind of calling that out. Just a thought.
Agree.
So the fee for the license is $250 annually.
There would be some room for some
Mhm.
incentive there. Okay. Next section is around minimum penalties, unless I've missed something. No. Next section, so 118.12 minimum penalties. This is the portion that, as Dan mentioned, council revised a year ago, perhaps?
I think 2 years ago.
So,
And there was at the time a pretty significant increase in penalties. I think before they were significantly less than this, so there was a pretty big escalation a couple of years ago on it.
I think if you just change them in a couple years ago, keeping them the way they are, but then adding that incentivizing, I think is a kind of a good balance. And I'm talking just the dollar amounts at the moment, but.
And I would honestly like to see a change in that second violation, an increase. I think, we understand folks can make mistakes, but if it happens a second time, I think it needs to mean something. And so that would be the piece there I have no problem holding the line on that $250 on the first violation. But that second violation, you know, you can motivate folks through disincentives as well, so you got a combination of the two.
I wonder if there's an opportunity to shorten the window. So 2 violations in 24 months. So I wonder, because what we want to, I think what we want to prevent, one of the things I'd like to prevent is making sure that if something goes wrong with a management group and you just have violation after violation after violation, so is it, you know, 2 violations within a year or something that shortens that time window that then is the more severe license, you know, suspension? I would be open to, because that's what you're trying to prevent, is that, you know, things have gone haywire, and it's one of the challenges of having compliance checks only every 6 months is the data on out of compliance. We have limited data points.
I kind of thought that's what it was saying there on line 2. It says in the second violation, within that 24-month period. That could be 2 days afterwards, you know what I mean? So I don't know if we're, I don't know how else you'd word it, or it might,
Yeah,
really.
that's how I understood it, but
Right.
I can see your point, though, what you're trying to get at here.
Because, so some of the high volume, so, you know, think of some of the high volume, you know, a gas station. 24 months is a long time. And yes, we should have an expectation that the number should be 0, but things do happen. I can just imagine a scenario where well-intentioned we've got great training program in place, and we've got all of the right, what seems to be a great program, and things just go bump in the night. 5 days could be very punitive.
But to Councilmember Husnick's point, the second violation could happen within a month after the, right?
Right.
It's anytime
So is the-
within that 24 months. That's the only point I was.
So
So
is that
is-
the same penalty then if one happens at month, you know, you have one, and then you're 23 months and you have the second violation? I guess my question is, is that the same penalty?
Correct. To that point, the 24-month look back, we do have a longer look back period, which I think kind of helps develop what are the ones that have systemic problems within, you know, I think if you reduce it down to 12 months, those escalation points fall off pretty quick, so they fall within the renewal period.
Yeah,
You know,
so-
so next year
yeah.
you renew, you re-clear the deck. This year you have a 2-year look back period, so if I had a violation in today, so between my renewal in 20 and 21 and potentially portion of 22 is all affected by that violation today, so you know you have to make sure you're maintaining compliance for a longer period of time, and in fact, a lot of the, you know,
Yeah.
when we go back through on a penalty, I mean, a 2-year look back period, you can kind of see, you know, are there certain license
To me,
holders that have
yeah,
more
to me,
issues?
they're held accountable longer in that particular,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's the way I'm reading it.
Yeah.
And
You know.
I think the chronic violators are the chronic violators.
Oh, yeah, there's no
You
question
know,
about that.
probably,
We just went through that not long ago.
yeah.
And-
We have had some very reputable retailers get caught, you know, and have had some challenges, and
Oh, yeah.
there's, you know, that,
Yeah. And I think that's where my idea around the, you know, bumping the 16-year-old at point of sale to 18-year-old, because those 16-year-olds, they succumb to that pressure, you know, much, and it is what it is.
Yeah.
You're going to succumb to that pressure much more easily than an 18-year-old will. So, let's kind of pull
That's a good
that,
point.
you
Yep.
know, kind of pull that away.
I see where you're coming from, Kathy. But again, in my particular vote is the fact that I'd like to hear from the industry, you know, from the people that are out there doing it every day. And the filling stations are a big thing. The vape area, that was a problem.
Yeah.
It really was.
and maybe when it, kind of circling back on that age to sell, maybe we do bundle that with that, you know, that definition of a tobacco shop.
You're right.
Tobacco product shop.
Yep.
Yep. I
Let's
could
get some
I could live
feedback
with
on
that.
that. Yeah.
Because I can see the challenges in kind of a multi-service, institution.
Right.
Providing something other than tobacco or vape products.
But you're right, the pressure is there, so.
Mhm.
It'll be good to hear how that's already being managed, if it is, and maybe yeah. Okay, so any other comments on the minimum penalty phase? We have some feedback for staff.
Yeah, just other than that, I'd like to see that second violation be a little stronger.
Would you make it a higher fine, or would you make it a higher fine?
Mhm.
I am open to making it a higher fine. It's the 5-day license suspension that I think can become,
Yeah.
I don't know, I like the combination of the two. I would be open to a higher fine.
Yeah, that would be my proposal there. And then do we have any provision in place, was my only other question here for those chronic violators. We've got the third violation, but what if we just can't get this under control? Is there a point at which, there's potentially a permanent revocation?
That's the third bullet, right?
That's the third violation.
Yeah,
But they can reapply, right?
to result in a
Within
license
a year.
revocation.
Oh, you're saying you're John
Yeah,
Farmer?
yeah. Is there a point at which it's
Well, license-
permanently revocated and they don't get to reapply?
For 1 year.
That's just my question.
So to that point, this is kind of where that management structure question comes up, because some businesses, if they do get the multiple violations and do, get their license revoked and not reissued, potentially could find somebody else with a clean slate to come in, hold the license for them. So that's where you can kind of take these companies and say, there's a chronic issue within the organization, there's 3 violations, person B comes in, because a year without a license, if you're selling only vape products, is probably going to be tough to maintain that organization. You're probably not going to have the cash flow to keep it. You're not going to have any cash coming in, so you're not going to be able to sustain operations for a year. You're going to go to a different location or different municipality to run the business. But the issue in that revocation piece of it, that's where you can kind of see those, I don't want to call them arm's length transactions, but you can find somebody else kind of coming in, getting the license holder, the existing management structure where a lot of the problem existed is still in place, and you now have a full reset of the 3 violations again. So
And we just had that issue.
I think the combination of seeing what's on the management team, you can kind of come in and get a little bit more of a picture of where, if there is a chronic issue within the organization itself, you get a bit more light on that topic.
And I suppose when appropriate, the council may impose penalties exceeding those stated below or impose other conditions deemed appropriate, leaves it open-ended enough that the, opportunity is there should we decide at any point that we need, to have.
And that was kind of the way it was with the last one. We set the conditions and they didn't meet them.
Right.
Right.
Simple as that.
Yeah,
We
And,
did.
good point.
and it was never challenged. Still don't understand that, but it wasn't challenged. So,
Well, I propose we jump that second violation to $750.
I don't have any challenges I don't have any problem with that. It should be a meaningful number, and
I'd go along.
750 is
I'd go
fair,
along with
yeah.
it. Sure. But it doesn't bother me any.
right.
Be interesting to see if it's a deterrent.
Right. Okay, through the minimum penalties, moving on to location restriction, which is the new provision. Comments, questions on the location restriction?
No, I like that. My question would be, for example, that little strip mall across the street from the high school, how far is that?
Too close.
I believe it's within the 500.
It is within
feet.
the 500?
500 feet, when you do a straight line map, it's a lot farther than I
Okay.
first anticipated. And that's the intent, you just want people easy access to the products located
Right.
adjacent to it.
Because I wouldn't want that to be, 600 feet, for example.
Right.
And we took the 500-foot language is directly taken from the adult use, language that we are currently have in city code. So that's kind of where the footage, and there's a much better definition in terms of like how to measure, how to apply it. So it's not, I will admit there's a little bit ambiguity, or it's not very clear cut at this point. We do have language that will insert in the language, in the ordinance will actually say it's a straight shot back to the edge of the property or to the, so we can kind of clarify that.
And then I didn't see anything in here, Dan, around density. Do we have an opportunity to put a cap on the number of licenses we issue in the community?
I believe so. I can definitely take a look back and do it. I know you can cap alcohol or off-sale licenses. I don't know, I'd confirm that with Bridget before we want to speak to it, but I can definitely take that back and see if we want to put a cap on there in terms of how many we issue.
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation between kind of those perceived norms, social norms around tobacco in the community when the density is high, and it does contribute to increased youth use. So I'd be
There's one on every
interested.
corner.
I'd be interested in taking a look at, what is our current state? How many licenses have we issued? Are there best practices around that? You know what I mean, in a community with a population our size or composition?
I think that'd be really valuable information to have.
If we, I'm supportive of us heading down that path or considering that. I would just encourage us to put some sort of a sunset provision or something that requires council reevaluation of that, so you don't end up with the law that's on the books for 10 years and we've grown, incrementally, and it's like kind of the unintended consequences, which would happen. So something that would prompt council review of that. So it's one of those things that should grow as we grow, and not knowing what that mechanism is, it's probably council discretion.
Yeah, this one kind of becomes a little bit of a values issue with me, and I, have a lot of folks that I work with that are in healthcare and public health that come through town, and I hear pretty consistent comments on the number of tobacco and e-cig shops we have in a community this size, so it really jumps out. And so I wouldn't mind, taking a look at that, seeing if there are some best practices around that.
Other questions on location restrictions? Okay. Should we circle back on conversation on consideration of tobacco 21? Thoughts? Sam, you kind of,
Well,
kind of
just-
kicked it off. You want to start?
Yeah, it just seemed like an opportune time to do that. I didn't know what the appetite was to do it, because I've been fielding some questions about it and talking about it, and there's been questions and comments and statements so forth, the state of Minnesota. There probably have been some conversation with the county. I don't know, I just want us to keep up to date. That's what it amounts to, And I'd like to see everybody stop smoking and use that stuff, and that's coming from somebody that did at one time, okay? So, by the way, I don't criticize folks that do, by the way, because it's a terrible, terrible addiction, and, which happened many, many, many years ago, but, it just seems like it'd go hand in hand with the liquor thing and what, kind of the sentiment is in the city, so I'd like to at least, discuss it deeper if you need to, or see what Bridget has to say about it, or at least, I think it should be part of the conversation with, if we can get the folks from the industry here to talk about it. Simple as that. It just seems like an opportune time to have it in the ordinance already, but
Right.
I think it's worth the discussion too. I've fielded a few emails about it as well and wasn't sure what the appetite was going to be.
Yeah,
And
right.
so I think it's worth a discussion.
I'd sure like to hear, the opinions from the public and,
Yeah. Right.
and particularly like we talked about it earlier, the industries, that the people are actually selling it.
Right.
And see how bad that would hurt them too, you know, so. Because that would push a lot of sales into neighboring communities that don't have the same regs. That consideration has to be there too.
Yeah, but I do think when you lead the charge in something like that too, it can have sort of that rippling effect to
Could.
those, and we're seeing that,
It
we're
could.
seeing that throughout
Yeah.
the state. Side-by-side municipalities, one adopts it, kind of takes the lead, leads the charge, and others are then, willing to say, we especially want to protect the kids.
Right.
I think one of the biggest positives, I mean, there are a lot of positives to doing it, certainly, it's all, adolescent brain development and all of those sorts of things, but for me, one of the positive things is it really keeps those products out of the high school. And that was part of the reason why the alcohol age was, bumped to 21 as well, is you do have a percentage of young people in that environment that are old enough. And it makes it, it becomes an added issue, for management in those environments, for school staff.
I just wondered out loud just how effective it really is, seriously. And I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it happen all over. And if it sure made an effect on our kids, that would be a good thing, no question about it.
My challenge on it is, so I have not heard a lot of positive community feedback on it, and as soon as I say that, of course, I'll get all kinds of positive community feedback, which is great. Like, I do want to hear what the community sentiment is on it. To me, it goes around kind of questions around what do we consider the age of consent and age of adulthood, and I understand and appreciate the alcohol because a youth's decision to drink impacts, from a public safety perspective, safety of those that are driving and interacting with that impaired individual. But as somebody who was married when they were 20 and had student loan debt and a car loan and my own rent and a full-time job and a college degree and could have been deployed to the military had I chosen that path, and could purchase a firearm, purchasing tobacco products, I kind of put into that same lump. And not to say that all of those, we could be asking that same question of all of those things.
That would be the argument as far as the military is concerned.
Right.
If you want to send me off to war, why can't I have a drink and
That
a
is-
cigarette,
But
So-
interesting, the military is in support of Tobacco 21.
Oh, no, I'm not arguing that, but
Right.
there are individuals within the military that are going to argue that.
Yeah, they're just,
So-
they see how it undercuts military readiness, and performance, and, it's costing them a lot of money.
Well, and I see
I
this-
understand all of it, but I'm just talking about the argument.
As I understand the consent issue and the military, but I see this as a public health issue, just like we want safe drinking water for our residents. Why would we not want them to be exposed to something that could lead to cancer and death?
But yes, and there's all sorts of things that
Mhm.
can lead to that, and tobacco is one of those items. I struggle with this one. So I too would like to hear some more community input on it and kind of get a better sense of where that is.
Does the council want me to, I can go back and talk to Bridget. I mean, I believe it's a pretty easy, language to craft. I mean, the ordinances I looked at, most of them were based on Tobacco 21. It was one of the reasons why they were updated. We could have that just ready to go, and if, at the point of adoption, that wants to get scrubbed out, that could get redlined out at that point, because that's part of the reason why it was on the this is on the June workshop versus the May. We wanted to see if the state was going to, do Tobacco 21, that would kind of alleviate the fact that the city would have to have that conversation. So that's one of the reasons why I had it all ready to go for May, and I'm like, wait a minute, the session's not over yet, so let's see what happens out of the session.
And it was so close to passing.
And when Tobacco 21 didn't go, it's like, okay, now that conversation could potentially
Right.
come back. So, I mean, if I'm hearing kind of direction that that's potentially an issue that, the council wants to take on, we can definitely have language drafted. It's probably better to let the industry know this is being considered in advance. Otherwise, if you don't want to have this go out,
Right.
let the industry know we're going to keep it 18 at the last minute. I mean, you're better off kind of putting in we're considering tobacco 21. They can
I-
provide their feedback on it.
I just
and-
want the conversation.
Yeah, I think allowing that conversation to happen in a process.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, make it fair for everybody.
Including it, I got some feedback that we weren't using our mics, and I'm the number one violator, so apologies. Including it in that draft and kind of having it part of what we expect, what we hear from public feedback would, I think, be good.
I can definitely, we can work, I can work with Bridget to get that language drafted for the ordinance update, and then we'll just summarize that tobacco 21 is being considered, and then feedback, the next steps, there was a public forum, a public hearing that will happen as part of this ordinance update, so that will be the opportunity to, if there's a lot, to kind of gauge what that interest is in adopting tobacco 21.
Okay, very good. Anything else related to this topic?
Thank you for your work, Dan.
Not a problem.
Yeah.
Just before we close, I just want to give you what the next steps actually are, so everybody kind of is on the same page as to, because there are some procedural things that we have to hit to make sure that this gets through. Looking at this, there's a 30-day notification window that we have to let current license holders know that we're considering the update, like I mentioned before. We'll be looking at kind of using the first week of July, probably, after thinking about today, probably after the 4th, kind of clearing that 4th of July hurdle. We'll be sending the notification out. The last time we did a license update, when I worked with the 2 a.m. closing, we did both the opportunity for them to come in and speak to the council, and we also did an online feedback, so they could submit it electronically. So if they can't take time off, they would have the opportunity to provide feedback. So we do that 30-day notification window. I talked to Bridget about the ordinance, actually drafting the updated ordinance later part of July. She said she had no problem meeting that end of July deadline. We would then post the updated ordinance on July 22nd, sometime during that week, which would give us, that hits the 10-day notification window for an ordinance requirements per state statute. August 12th would be the public hearing for the proposed changes. Based on the feedback, we could either consider the ordinance adoption during that council meeting, and then that ordinance would be in place as soon as it's published, to be later in that week. Or if there are some substantial changes that need to be done, there's that second meeting in August, which would still get us in time before we meet the deadline. So there's kind of, earliest would be August 12th, second meeting in August would be the other adoption period. So just kind of wanted to get council aware of that's the proposed timeline at this point. So I'll just kind of go through, slot that into the work plan, and we'll get that, take these changes from tonight and get all these compiled into the updated ordinance.
Would we have an opportunity to do some form of education around Tobacco 21 and the benefits of Tobacco 21 publicly? I mean, are we able to do something like that as we're considering this potentially? Some kind of community education, or I'm not quite sure what we can and can't do in that regard.
Are you thinking like someone from Washington County Public Health?
Yeah, or, there's a lot of great documentation by very credible resources out there, even links to websites, or, a lot of them have downloadable PDFs with a lot of the things we've discussed. Because it becomes kind of an emotional issue, and you want the rational issue in there, the rational piece of that argument in there too. And so I'm just kind of thinking out loud here.
I think to that effect, from the city's perspective, if they're advocating tobacco 21 and doing education, on the flip side, you then would have to advocate for tobacco 18. You have to play, so I think from the city's perspective, it's kind of best just to say, here's what's being considered,
Okay.
and then let the groups kind of
Decide on it.
decide.
Well, so official city perspective, I completely agree with what you said. If you as a council member, want to have,
Correct.
host a town hall meeting, or, host something, and, certainly there's room for advocacy as council members of, certain, where we're not considering, there's certain areas where, we have to maintain that position of neutrality, but actually, I think you maybe stepped into a question that maybe Bridget would be, like, what's council's ability to advocate for these types of things versus where is there the requirement, as we have, for example, in zoning law, where we have this position of neutrality?
Yeah, I'll have her clarify that, because, I speak from the city's perspective that, that's, the neutrality is kind of key. But I'll follow up with Bridget, and we'll follow up with council on what she recommends or what the position is from her.
Certainly. Some of that is to your point, education and doesn't
Right.
necessarily have to be advocacy, but
No,
kind of
just
understanding.
education,
right.
credible sources,
Yep.
you know, that kind of thing. What does the research say? All of that,
Right, correct.
yeah.
Anything else related to tobacco ordinance update? I'll echo everyone's comments. Thank you, Dan. That's great. Moving forward. All right, next item on our agenda is the strategic planning update. Dan, can you just pull up the materials on screen? The memo from Patrick.
Just give me 1 second while I get it.
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
I can do
Patrick is out. I'm gonna pinch hit on this one just because he and I jumped on a fairly quick planning call with Big River last week just to talk through this. Our goal tonight, as soon as I can get the right page on screen, our goal tonight is to just get your feedback on timeline and scope. And for some reason, this thinks I'm trying to print and I'm not. Here we go. So as we've kind of previously talked, we have 4 planned sessions on the agenda, and as is the Big River Plan, we can, this is their foundation. We are free to add on to this foundation or, augment the plan as to whatever will fit for us. And I have found them to be very accommodating. The initial outline that was presented, and I think calendared on everyone's calendar, is a council and staff kickoff meeting on June 26th. I'm just going to walk through the timeline and the process a little bit, and then we'll get a little bit more into the detail of what that agenda would be for that first meeting. That kickoff meeting would then be followed up with 2 community input meetings scheduled for July 10th and July 17th.
How many are allowed at each? I mean, what is
I
that?
asked that exact same question, and he said, if you have 35 at each session, that's fantastic. If you have 100, we will scale it to be 100. Now, it's great to know that if you're going to have 100 show up, that you're going to have 100 show up, but he said, and they've done even larger sessions than that. They scale, a lot of the work is done in small groups with readouts, and they scale the work to fit the session. But he was very comfortable that they would be able to accommodate community of our size. You could, go ahead.
In 2 meetings?
In 2 meetings,
Okay.
and they are identical meetings, and so as we're considering invitations, generally, if somebody wants to come to both, certainly you're welcome to both, but the content and the process is expected to be the same in each meeting.
Okay.
So the invitation to to the entire community, it's open to any stakeholder of interest. And then on the personal invites that we extend, it would be to ask for participation in either of those sessions. Those sessions are formatted in a facilitated manner that is driven to build consensus from the group and input from the group. Council is encouraged to attend to welcome and to thank, and I think Big River in their presentation mentioned this point as well of we are encouraged to welcome and thank for attendance, and then we are encouraged to get out of the way and get out of the room and let them do their work. I have mixed feelings on that. On one hand, I love the participation and hearing firsthand that rich feedback. Second point of that, though, and which I do agree with, is as soon as we're in the room, the dynamic changes,
Right.
and we want it to be the community's meeting, not ours. And then we take that feedback along with feedback that comes from the online survey. We'll talk about that online survey here in a second, and that comes into our 4th session. And that 4th session, it's up to us. If we are feeling, only 50% of the way there, we can build out work plan. If we are feeling that we're gelled on 90% of it and we're working out details on 10%, we can kind of gauge as needed.
And I personally will be out of town for the July 24th date.
We should probably reschedule because that's kind of when all of them kind of come together. So we should, yes. So maybe just a quick calendar check first, logistics. So the 26th, is everybody able to make that? And I believe I had this conversation with Paul. I think he's able to be there as well. So the July 24th, we will need that to be rescheduled. I think it is important that we have all 5 of us there for that session since
Dan,
that
we were
is-
talking about having a meeting on the airport commission on the 26th. Remember, we were going to boost it forward or something? Remember that conversation?
Yeah, it's not trending that direction right now.
Okay.
I just checked today on MnDOT's website, so I'm thinking it's gonna be the 10th.
Okay,
So
all right.
I think we're
Yeah,
clear.
There was some conversation at the meeting of bumping it up because of the MnDOT situation with their funding, so.
Okay,
But apparently it's not going to happen.
okay,
And I'm technically on vacation that next week, but will be in town and I can make it work if we
Okay.
bump it out.
the week of July 29th?
Yep,
Okay.
I will make it work if we
All right.
bump it out a week.
I will have, Dan, can you kind of survey council on calendars? Like, the end of that week, July 25th, 26th, and then the week of July 29th, can you kind of survey and see availability? Just so we can, sooner rather than later, lock down that second date?
The
And
20
again, if that second date is part one of a series of follow-ups that are needed, again, that's up to us to,
Okay.
we can use that if needed.
The 29th would be the only one I'd have an issue with.
Okay. Like, we can get that feedback into Dan for that final session then.
And I can make, again, on vacation that week, but I can make anything work
Okay,
because I will be in town. I will not be in town the week of the July 24th.
okay, very good. Our first kickoff, maybe let's skip over to the agenda for our first kickoff meeting, which is scheduled for June 26th from 6 to 8:30. The agenda is actually on page 15 of your packet.
Dan's got it up here too.
Do an overview. He's kind of listed out the goals for this session. A fairly tight timeline. As I read this timeline and I think about preparing, it's really, we're coming in with our thoughts on the page and we're coming in prepared to discuss 5-year vision elements, as well as, if you look at the next page, the matrix on recent successes and issues. And then top items for updated vision, if we update the vision, and then priorities. When I see a timeline like this, I read, we're kind of discussing and building consensus and kind of identifying where's there's consensus and what needs further work. I think that would be a good outcome for that first discussion. Thoughts? All right.
It's pretty straightforward.
Also important for that meeting is, and this was key to Big River's presentation to us, they feel strongly that community involvement is increased when there's personal invitations that are extended. I would encourage each of you to start that if we are locked in, as soon as we're able to confirm that those are the dates in July for community meetings, that we start personally extending those invitations. And frankly, from my perspective, if all of us reach out to some of the same people, better to have 5 invitations than somebody to get missed. Bring your invitation list to that meeting, because part of the end of that meeting will be doing an update of who's been contacted so far, just so we can make sure that we've reached out to the right groups, that we've got the right personal invitations. Again, also knowing, and clearly to anybody in the public who's watching, everybody is invited, whether or not, we can't do personal invitations to all 20,000 residents, but there are certain stakeholder groups that we will want to make sure that have representation.
And I'm assuming we would probably ask them which of those 2 sessions they prefer to attend.
I think we would ask them to either what works with their schedule, right? Is
That's
that-
what I mean,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Which one do they
Right.
prefer to attend?
Agree.
Yeah.
Dan will start to do, as soon as we're firm on those 2 dates, Dan will also start to do some social media promotion. Dan, can you use a Facebook event for those 2 items? There's a nice user experience that goes along with that, on people getting notifications and,
Yeah, two things I thought with this would be, Facebook, getting out on the social media side of it, weekly email, we'll go out, we'll do a save the date this week, say, because we're relatively close to July 10th already, so we'll get that out saying, save the date. And then we are gonna see, and we've already seen it, a pretty big increase in web traffic due to the 4th of July. So I'll put a card on the homepage of the website, right next to the 4th of July card that says, strategic planning session, July 10th. So try to capture some of that additional traffic. So, even though we have a short window, we're in a good time period in terms of activity on the website. So I think that's going to help draw a lot of people in. So we'll kind of take that digital rollout. I'll also get hard copies of the invites up to the senior center, because I know that they typically don't have as much access to computers. So we'll get that. I'll talk to Sharon just to make sure. Anytime we do any type of community feedback activity, I tend to always make sure that they have hard copies up there as well, so they can provide, because you can sometimes solicit 60 applications or 60 responses if you kind of give them a comment card, say
Yeah.
fill it out, and a lot of that's good feedback. So I'll make sure that we get the senior center included as well in the
Yeah, I
rollout.
know several members of their board would like to attend for sure. So that's good.
that's good. I had thought of this until tonight, Arts in the Park, is our table, Arts in the Park, we could,
It's a great idea.
I'm happy to spend some time at Arts in the Park at a table if we wanted to have a city table, and we're both invited, to dual fold, collect some feedback there to those that are wanting to give it. Also, some cards that can just provide the link to the survey, that those that want to just fill it out electronically, and then certainly some invitation cards
Yeah,
to those who want to come in person.
Yep, kind of you're invited.
Yeah, tell us now,
Right.
click online, or be invited.
I can definitely check with Jamie. I know we have in the past had city presence at those
Yeah.
events. For that exactly, comp planning was one that I know we had a booth up there for quite a bit of the Arts in the Park series, so I can talk to her to see if there's space available for us to kind of put a tent up there.
Yeah.
I know we also have some staff that would be able to potentially be up there and give handouts out during the, we have some interns working for us that they could do that as part of their activities on Tuesday nights.
Is the PD still up there weekly?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, because they could have some on their table too.
So we have, assuming it's tomorrow's too early, we would have 2 Arts in the Park events before the 10th, because we don't have Arts in the Park on the week of the 4th of July. So we could do an Arts in the Park table on June 25th, and we could do an Arts in the Park table on July 9th. Granted, that doesn't give a ton of time for those that are attending on the 9th, but I think you can also just get some feedback at at that table as well.
That's a great idea. It's nice to be out there anyway.
Yeah, it is, right. And then I mentioned the survey, there's a copy, it's a very open-ended survey, intended to capture, well, what's on people's minds, what's top around what's working well, what are things that need attention, intentionally open-ended to solicit that rich feedback. In a compressed timeline like this, my experience is sometimes that those open-ended questions are more illustrative, rather than trying to rank the city on a scale of 1 to 5, and we're trying to, figure out what somebody meant by giving us a 3. We can certainly supplement, or do some follow-up if there were some areas where there was some question and we wanted some follow-up survey feedback. We can certainly do some follow-up items as well as
Yeah,
we get
I
further into the
guess-
process.
I guess my one question would be, do they have an opportunity, if they are willing to, include their name and contact information?
Dan, that's a great,
And that could be an optional.
yes. I think that is, are you open, and are you open to being contacted for future, further? That'd be nice. Other feedback points on kind of process discussed so far? I know this feels like a lot very quickly. The upside is we should have an outline available for, to at least supplement budget discussions that will be happening in August. Again, we get to ring the bell and say when we're done, but at least this gives us some framework to chew on before budget discussions start, because that timeline is pretty set and we can't move it as much as we would like to.
So as a point of clarification, is there going to be some additional instruction coming to us in terms of what to prepare ahead of time coming into that June 26th meeting? I mean, this is, somewhat clear. Are we supposed to be kind of jotting some things down here, coming in prepared, reviewing?
I think that's a very reasonable, good request. We
Yeah,
should.
that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, just so we're coming in fully prepared.
Yep.
To that June 26th meeting.
Yep. A kickoff package. Here's what to
Yeah.
expect.
Yeah.
Confirmation. Here's your homework.
Yeah.
You need a clear homework
Yeah.
assignment. I agree.
Yeah.
Any other feedback items or questions? This was the last, I've said a couple of times, if those July dates are tentative, this meeting was kind of the last domino to fall to consider those dates the July 10th and July 17th. This was the last night that could have changed that. So if we don't have any objections, I think council members, feel pretty confident that those are good dates and starting to get the word out there. I'm certainly starting to extend invitations. The city, Dan, will you want to talk about, there will be an invitation. So as we're updating the list, you will also be sending an invitation with more details.
Yeah, we can craft like a city issued, on the personalized invitation list, we can definitely craft something that has city logo, kind of an outline or just an overview of what to expect during the session that goes out to the personalized invites, so we can make sure that it's consistent. So everybody that's on the council invite list gets the same material, same invitation, and it comes from a city account. So we'll work on getting that drafted and prepared for release. I think the ideal way to do that is through an email. We could even set up a secondary, if we had email addresses, set up a secondary distribution list through our email that we send our weekly emails out to, that we could actually do the invite through that service, and then we can verify, did they receive it? And then we can even track opens on it as well, so we can say, you know what, this section's not opening up their mail, maybe we do a follow-up, on the ones that don't. So we get a little bit more back-end data versus just doing a big Outlook mail send. So probably craft it through MailChimp at this point, which is our provider, and then we'll just release it that way.
So, Jan, clarifying rules, if we as council are planting seeds and if we're providing you with those names and email addresses, you're able to follow up with some of the more detail of the official invite from the city?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, so if we just get the names and the email addresses or the contact information,
Perfect.
we'll get that into MailChimp, and then we'll just draft the details of what's going on, attend either July 10th, July 17th, either or. And then the other thing too is that if we get a list of who actually attends the 10th and we have, like, say, half the list still hasn't been attended, we can send a reminder out to July 17th as well. So we can kind of get those all pre-canned, get those all released in a certain time period. So we'll make sure those get released outside of our regular email schedule, so they look a little bit,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, what's this on a Tuesday afternoon versus everybody's kind of used to that Friday release. So we'll send them out at a time that's unique to these events.
Perfect.
And I think to make it very clear, they only need to attend one of three. So they don't look at this in the middle of summer and say, really?
Yes.
You want me to do what?
Yes.
And I'm wondering if we couldn't use that July 24th as sort of a backup date then, if we're not going to,
We could.
for a third meeting,
We
if we get an overwhelming response.
Absolutely, we could.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Did anybody mention an open invitation in the paper, for instance, on this, or?
Do that as well.
Thank you.
Good point.
Good
So I
idea.
think, yeah,
Yep,
We can definitely put something in the paper as well for the next
yeah.
3 weeks or so.
perfect.
We're gonna take away all the excuses for not showing up.
That's right.
That's the whole idea.
We have our first sign up right there.
There you go.
All right. Anything else on this? I'm gonna make one more note to myself before we move on.
Just nice to get it started.
Yes. Okay, next item on the agenda is our other topic. I have one item I'd like to mention and bring up, and maybe we'll do so then if anyone else has anything. We are in a rather tight turnaround on the trash RFP, as everybody knows. And as I was talking with staff this week about what that turnaround was going to look like, Patrick was asking if we, as council, wanted to have a subgroup of us, it can't be a quorum necessarily, but if we wanted to have a subgroup of us working side by side with staff as they're making the evaluation for that first meeting that's going to happen on July, I should have had a calendar in front of me, my apologies. July 8th. So RFPs are due June 28th. Over the week of the 4th of July, staff is going to be working fast and furious so that materials can be released as part of our council packet on July 5th. And then that will be, is it planned to be on our agenda for consideration on July 8th? And so the question of staff, and I wanted to get council feedback, is during the week of the 4th of July, number of options. We could have a workshop on it. The challenge with having a workshop on it is staff will not have had a lot of time to do all of the analysis on a lot of data. Staff's recommendation is that we have 2 members just do a, kind of providing first glance. And if council wanted to do that, or we can all see it when the public sees it on the 5th. And I'm open to either scenario.
You're talking about a workshop like on the 3rd perhaps, or 2nd or 3rd maybe, or?
And also, I want to be clear, actually, I should be clear on something. We could have a workshop, and also to be clear, the RFPs are public as soon as they come in the door, right? There's, it's the staff analysis part that I do think there is some value to give staff some time to get through that analysis and start, ask some follow-up questions and
This is
kind of
gonna be
pull
a-
it together.
This is going to be a big deal.
It is going to be a
It's going
big
to take a
deal.
lot of time to decipher what's what,
It is.
apples to apples, because
is.
all these different
Right.
configurations, all the different sizes and times, and it's going to be, so we have to give ourselves plenty of time to work on it.
We do. My preference, because it is a big deal, is to give staff the week of the 4th of July to do that, and we see it as a group, as those materials are issued on the 5th. But staff is open to a number of scenarios to facilitate us in our decision-making, so.
Mayor Bain, I don't know if we're open to public comment, but we had a hand raised up there.
Certainly.
Madam Mayor,
Can you
council members,
come to the podium though, so those at home can, I'll get an email if you don't come to the podium.
Madam Mayor and council members, under Minnesota state law, bids and bid packets are open to the public
They are.
as soon as they are received.
They are.
Requests for proposals and those proposals are not open to the public as soon as they are received unless the council decides to make them that way, because an RFP allows you the capacity to negotiate with vendors, and it is not in your best interest
Thank you for clarifying.
to have parties that you may be negotiating with know each other's numbers. And I apologize for interrupting,
No.
but
And thank you for clarifying that. My point is that we can decide when we choose to have that open. But as soon as it goes to a quorum of council, that is a door
a
opener.
public, yeah.
no, ma'am. I apologize, I don't mean to
No, please, correct
to be rude.
no, yeah, thank
But
you.
if the council routinely has things that you keep confidential, personnel decisions, things like that, and you do have the ability, because this is an RFP, I would suggest that recently I worked with Lakeland Shores, St. Mary's Point, some cities down there, and those were held confidential until the contracts were executed. And then all of the proposals were indeed public. You do have the capability of holding things confidential on an RFP until the contract is executed. And I apologize for interrupting.
Thank you for clarifying. Dan, can we, and there's two, so thank you. There's kind of two questions that get brought up. And the more kind of administrative question I was wondering, or process question I was wondering of council is when do we, timeline of when we want to be involved. But I think there is some clarification from Bridget on, and it's a little bit of a clarification, but also then for us, a process question. We probably need Patrick to weigh in on what his plan would be, just knowing that timeline.
Sure.
And our wishes in that.
So what would administration like to see happen? Would they like to see us try to do a little deeper dive into each of those contracts, just a couple council members? Would that be helpful? What's the proposal here?
So, based on my conversation with Patrick, he felt it would be helpful to have a couple members of council kind of working arm in arm through some of those details as they're being accumulated, provide some initial feedback in real time,
Yeah, I'd be willing to
because
take
it
some
is
time
going
to
to
do
be a
that. 'Cause
fairly tight turnaround.
I assume this is going to take place during the day, during regular hours.
Like, yes.
I'd certainly have some time to look at them for a couple days or whatever it takes.
I think, and I look at it, so I was considering process, like, do we already have a subcommittee of council that is set up? Like, we do a very similar conversations around personnel committee meetings, right? Or, initial round of budget conversations where we have a subcommittee of council working. It just didn't necessarily line up with one of those, and so wanted to have the conversation tonight. But I do think, like a budget or like some of those personnel committee, it does make sense to have two people through it first. I am happy to participate. I don't have to participate if there's a couple of others that are interested.
Well, let me know what you want to do, honestly.
And-
Seriously, because if there's a time
Yeah.
that I can be there when
Right.
somebody else can't, I'd be happy to do that.
Right.
It's going to be a little tougher for me. It's the week of the 4th.
It would be the week of the 4th. Right. Okay.
If somebody else is dying to do it,
Availability, thoughts?
Could be challenging,
Okay.
but possible. I would be very comfortable with you and Councilmember Husnick.
First look?
Yeah.
First look.
Well, the main thing is I have the times that I can do
Yeah.
it, so.
Right.
That's going to change in
I
about a
have-
week,
I have
so.
no problem with that.
Or a couple weeks after that.
But also, I want clarification and thank you for the reminder on kind of what the process is and.
I will get clarification on,
Okay.
yeah, and I apologize, I'm a little bit out of the loop on this. I will get clarification on
Absolutely.
where we're at with it
Right.
and
Yep.
make sure the decisions are, the process is followed to a T.
Right. The question came up of should it go through budget committee, and it's not a budget committee topic, it's
Yeah.
out of scope, so let's have something separate. Okay,
You're going to have to have 4 different pieces of paper writing down all these things and try to mash them together. And
yep, okay. And we'll have, just so everyone's clear, we'll have Patrick respond back to everyone on here's what the process looks like, timeline, and his expectations. Okay,
Madam Mayor, we have lots to do here in the next month or two. I just want to remind everybody of what I'd like to see on a workshop is upholding our ordinances and enforcing our ordinances and that sort of thing. I want to at least have that conversation. A couple of things that come to mind, zoning ordinances and that kind of thing is certainly
Yes.
one of them. The other one, we went through a terrible situation with a council member that moved out of town and it was a big deal and all that. I'd like to see some kind of a strengthening of our own ordinances to fix that, if it's possible. But I'd sure like to have the conversation anyway, so. I'd just like to see those two things on the next, not on the next workshop, because we got so much to do with all this other stuff but sometime soon.
well, I So thank you for bringing that up. Zoning questions are something that I get questions of. It's the toughest questions that we get, and there's a fair number of them, and I think
yeah.
it's a great conversation for us to talk about, especially as we're going into budget season, because I suspect some of
Yep.
those things are, budget impacted, but also there's potentially some policy questions where certainly we've got our code, but the questions around our enforcement policies
Yep.
are
Yep.
due for some updates or at least rediscussion. And it's on my mind
So
almost
much of our stuff
every
is
day.
reactive instead of, proactive, and so I just want to have the conversation, I want to have a public conversation about it, and any feedback we can
Agree.
get on it, so.
Well, and I think, I agree, this is the time because we need to be able to align resources accordingly.
Right.
We do.
Yeah.
Yes,
It's just a lot to do in the next couple of
Is a-
months, so.
there's a lot.
We need to get these,
Correct.
that RFP is really important,
right,
and the strategic plan is important,
correct.
so. You're gonna earn your pay in the next couple of months. And don't expect a raise either.
Any other items come before us tonight?
I'd make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries.